Early in the war, German U-boats had reaped a grim harvest on shipping bound for England, but the balance had shifted, and convoys were getting across with fewer losses. Even so, the North Atlantic crossing remained extremely dangerous.
Actually crossed in one of the largest, I was told, one of the largest convoys ever to go across the Atlantic. I think there was something like 160 ships. And we lost, as I recall, 6 or 7 ships on the way. And I happened to see one, which was a very, very unpleasant sight to see because it happened to be a tanker and it exploded, and you know that there were probably no survivors.
As the convoys slowly plied the waters of the North Atlantic, their hulls were virtually bursting with the tools of war. If there was one factor that gave the Allies an edge in the coming battle, it was America's ability to produce staggering amounts of war material. In addition to the tens of thousands of men America would provide, a tremendous amount of the equipment that would be employed on D-Day had come from the forges of American industry. In the first 5 months of 1944, 800,000 troops and 9 million tons of supplies reached England, all earmarked for the invasion of France.
England was an armed camp. You could look out on the fields and see nothing but tanks, maybe 40 acres of nothing but tanks in a row, and another 40 acres further away with nothing but 1.5 ton trucks, and another one with jeeps. And England was a arsenal, actually, a huge depot for the invasion buildup.
As American divisions would come from the United States to England, we then would have practice invasions with them.
They were based largely at Slapton Sands because that was a beach, a sandy beach, that had some of the same characteristics that Utah and Omaha had.
We would take the Green American Division that hadn't seen any action out into the channel and then turn around and at dawn make an invasion at Slapton Sands.
They put us on LCTs, landing craft for tanks, and we would go in and wouldn't do nothing. And then when you come back out, do the same thing, come back out, then they come back to port, load the tanks up, M7s, all equipment, bring them back to where we started off at. They just constantly did that from February all the way to May.
Those were good training exercises. And there was also training exercises that went on for the Rangers who later made the assault at Pointe du Hoc. They were training on some of the bluffs at like Dover and then other places like that.
We spent Christmas and the months up to the Normandy invasion in one practice invasion after another.
Assault training included every phase of the coming battle.
Did a lot of night training. Made more combat jumps. And when we didn't jump at night, we would get on a truck and camp, and then they would take us out to some road, and we would get off the truck spaced out, as though you had jumped from a plane. And then you would make your maneuvers, assemble like you were going to in a combat jump.
We knew this was going to be the biggest thing that we had been in up to that time, and we trained pretty seriously.
While the men who would form the spearhead on D-Day were crucial to Overlord's success, it was the behind-the-scenes work of support staff, in many cases drawn from the ranks, that would tip the balance in favor of the Allies.
I reported to actually Eisenhower headquarters in London, learned very quickly that we had been selected to organize the beaches on Omaha Beach.
I reported to London, and there we studied by heart Normandy. I mean, I don't know why there was a bunch of us kids, but everybody had a sector of Normandy, and they knew, pardon me, exactly where we were going. And I had to memorize every town, every road, everything about Normandy.
It was a hectic time, but I was always amazed that people like me who were just an enlisted man working in the war room, seeing all the preparations. At night, I was free to go out to the pub or go any place I wanted to.
In spite of the obvious security risk, many soldiers were able to get up to London on a 2-day pass.
There were, Polish, there were French who were now stationed in Britain. But then when the Americans began arriving, I mean, the streets were absolutely cluttered.
They had this lovely accent that we all fell for because they were all like the movie stars we've been watching, the pictures for years. But they were generous to a fault. They never came on a date without a can of peaches or a carton of Camel cigarettes. We just loved them.
The people were very nice, I say, extremely nice. The countryside is all green, very wet, very damp. The summertime, I think, consisted of approximately a week of good weather spread out. Maybe it was a bad year.
The countryside was absolutely beautiful, and the pubs were wonderful places to go.
They were just jammed, and they were fun places. They weren't like bars, drinking bars. They were just, you went there, and just everybody talked, full of smoke, full of servicemen, servicewomen, and girls. And you just let down. It was a great, as I say, the best of times and the worst of times.
If you treat them just like you'd like to be treated, be the first to offer a cigarette. I didn't smoke, but we were given rations, That was like gold. Go to the pub. Oh, man, I tell you, go to the pub. And you guys smoke? My God, they came around real quick.
You'd go into London, bomb start, everybody collected in a subway, the underground, as they called it. That was where they would take shelter until the air raids were over. But they were a tough, gutty bunch of people.
We had 2 officers billeted. My parents, did. You were just issued the order, these 2 will be billeted at your house, and that's that. But they were, as I remember, very nice.
They warned us when we got into the English homes that the English people didn't really have very much, and to be careful what you took from them. Well, he'd always ask us to have a drink evening, and we said, no, Major, So one day he said to me, John, he said, you've been here long enough now to know where the cellar is. He said, get on and get me a bottle of scotch. And I went down in the cellar. They had a room full with cases of scotch. And I went back up and I said, we don't have to worry about the Major. We can accept his hospitality for a drink.
My father and a lot of other fathers said they're oversexed, overdressed, overpaid, and over here.
I think a lot of the resentment came from British men because, of course, the Americans tended to have far more money. They had nicer uniforms. So I think a lot of British men were not that happy with this flood of Americans.
In the early months of 1944, the final command structure was put together for Eisenhower's headquarters. Dubbed Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, or SHAEF, Eisenhower's staff included a high proportion of senior British officers. When General Montgomery first took a look at the Cossack plan for Overlord in January of 1944, he immediately recognized that it would need to be drastically expanded for it to succeed. The original plan called for 3 divisions to be pushed ashore on D-Day. Monty and Ike agreed that this was too few. The Germans could cordon off such a small force with panzer units, and the push to expand the beachhead would stall. Instead, Monty proposed adding another beach in both the American and the British sectors, as well as 3 airborne divisions that would be dropped behind the beach defenses. Everyone agreed this was the right way to go, but the expansion created a significant problem. There simply were not enough landing craft available in the theater to get 5 divisions ashore on the first day of the invasion. In the end, Overlord had to be delayed by a month to allow further production from the U.S. to reach England.
So they're building them in the streets of New Orleans, just roping off streets and building Higgins boats. They're building them so fast that they're on trains headed out of town. People are still painting them gray and putting the numbers on them.
The landing craft shortage also caused the proposed invasion of southern France to be pushed back 2 months. These twin solutions solved the landing craft dilemma, but without a comfortable margin. Should the Germans destroy vast numbers of Allied LSTs on D-Day, supplying the men ashore might become an impossible task.
Until they could capture a port, in this case, Cherbourg, the Allies would be dependent on supplies they could bring in over the beaches. That's a difficult thing to do, and they had designed some very ingenious plans and devoted a lot of time and effort into making ports that could be towed across the channel and set up. These were called mulberries. They included all kinds of ingenious devices that had been made with great effort and imagination and, of course, resources. These included breakwaters, floating piers, and other devices that would allow ships to unload their supplies over a beach, even though there wasn't a real established port there. They also came up with an idea called Pluto, pipeline under the ocean, which would allow fuel to be pumped directly from England to Normandy.
The mere scope of an invasion the size of Overlord meant that hundreds of American and British officers would work to develop the plan and thus know the innermost secrets of the operation. These officers and the secret documents they studied were codenamed Bigot.
They were extremely careful about who came into knowledge that would consider them to be of a nature that needed to be bigoted. In other words, there were not very many people who were bigoted early on. As you became closer to the day for the invasion, then of course this information was spread among more people.
While Ike and his staff prepared and planned, Churchill fretted. Time and again, as the armies trained in the English countryside, the great Prime Minister fell prone to bouts of pessimism. He told Ike and other senior leaders that he had visions of the flower of England's youth dying on the Normandy beaches. His anxiety only increased after the Anzio landings in February.